The last morning of October, in the gravel court at Ravensworth Hall, 3 enormous dogs stood between the visitors and the door, and not one of the ladies in the carriage would put a foot down. They were deerhounds, gray and rough-coated, taller at the shoulder than a child of 10, bred on that estate for 4 generations. The oldest was Vesper. The youngest, a rangy bitch with a white blaze at her throat, was Ash. The third had no name anyone used aloud anymore. He was simply the Marquess's dog, and he did not leave the door. Lady Cordelia Manning had come to be admired. She had a new pelisse of bottle green, a bonnet trimmed at Bath, and a maid whose entire employment was the hair beneath it. She lowered her slipper toward the step, and Ash rose from the flagstones without hurry and showed her the whole length of her teeth, and the sound that came out of her was not a bark. It was lower than that, and older, and it went through the carriage floor and into the bones of Lady Cordelia's foot, and she withdrew the foot and did not put it down again. "They are savage," she said, when she had recovered her voice. "They ought to be shot." The footman said nothing. There was nothing a footman could say. Behind her, half forgotten in the rear seat with a work-basket on her knees, and a shawl darned twice at the elbow, sat a woman of 26, named Honora Blake. She had been engaged 11 weeks earlier as companion to Lady Cordelia's aunt. She was not admired, and she was not expected to descend at all. She was expected to hold the work-basket. She opened the carriage door on the far side because Lady Cordelia had begun to weep, and someone had to fetch the salts from the box strapped behind. She stepped down onto gravel with her plain gray skirt gathered in one hand, and was 2 strides from the door before she understood that the dogs had moved, all 3 of them. Not toward the carriage, toward her. Honora stood entirely still. She had grown up in a house with hounds and knew better than to run, and the great gray one who had no spoken name came and put his head against her hip and leaned his whole weight there, the way a horse leans on a post, and shut his eyes. Ash lay down across her feet. Vesper lay down beside Ash. At the top of the steps, in the shadow of the doorway, a man in a dark blue coat had watched the whole performance with his hands behind his back and his face giving away precisely nothing. He came down 2 steps and stopped. He looked at the dogs on the gravel, then at the woman standing among them with a work-basket, still hooked over her arm, and something went across his face and was gone before anyone could name it. Then he turned and went in without a word to anybody. The door closed behind him, and Lady Cordelia, who had been weeping, stopped weeping and looked at Honora Blake for the first time in 11 weeks. That was the beginning of it. If you have ever been the woman holding the basket, stay with me a while. Edmund Ware, 7th Marquess of Ravensworth, was 34 that autumn, and the county had decided a great many things about him, all of them wrong. All of them delivered with confidence at every dinner table between Selby and the coast. He had come into the title 4 years earlier, and buried a wife in the 2nd year of it. He kept dogs that would not suffer a lady to cross his gravel. He did not go to London for the season, and he had not stood up with a woman at a public assembly since the funeral. The county had concluded that grief had made him strange. The county was fond of that word. It excused them from looking further. Honora had heard it in the carriage on the drive-up from Mrs. Ball. Selina Ware, the aunt she had been engaged to attend, who spoke of her nephew the way one speaks of weather one has given up hoping will change. He was not always strange, Mrs. Ware had said to the window rather than to anyone. He was the kindest boy in 3 counties. Now he sets animals at the door and calls it a household. Honora had said nothing. Companions were not paid to have opinions about marquises, and she had learned exactly how much silence her position required, which was all of it. She had not always been silent. 2 years before, she had been Miss Blake of Harden Cross, and her father had been a physician with 400 a year and a library she had read through twice. He died in February of a cough he took from a patient who could not pay him, and the 400 a year died with him, and the library was sold in lots at Doncaster in the spring. She watched a man in a brown coat buy her Herodotus for 11 shillings. What she had kept was one thing only. a small brass compass, no bigger than a pocket watch, that her father had carried on his rounds for 30 years, with a dent in the case from the winter he was thrown from his gig at Harden Bridge. She kept it in the work-basket, under the darning, and did not take it out where anyone could see. The wound her circumstances had delivered was not that she was poor. Poverty she could carry. It was the quieter thing that had arrived the first week she took a wage and never once left her since she had become furniture. People spoke across her. Lady Cordelia had asked her aunt, in her hearing, whether the companion could be trusted with the good gloves, in the tone one uses about a hall stand. She had been a person for 24 years. She was learning, at 26, that a person could be put away. The household was smaller than the house deserved. Prentice, the butler, had been there since the old Marquess's day. Mrs. Dunn, the housekeeper, ran the place with a ring of keys and a kindness that surfaced only in what she did. And there was a boy of 7, Jamie, the head groom's son, allowed the run of the kitchen garden and the stable yard and nowhere else. Honora met the boy on her second day. Gone out to the physic garden for rosemary, for Mrs. Ware's headache, and finding instead a small person on an upturned bucket, with his arms around the neck of the gray deerhound, who had no name. "He is not allowed in the garden," Jamie said immediately, defensive before she had said a word, "but he does not like the yard when the wheels go." "Then he had better stay," Honora said, "and I had better not have seen him." The boy looked at her hard, the way children look at adults when they are working out which kind they are, then decided something, and went back to the dog's neck. "What is he called?" Honora asked. "Bran," the boy said. Then lower. "Nobody says it. His lordship does not like it," said Honora, crouched among the rosemary. The great dog opened one eye and did not move. "Then I shall not say it," she said, "but I shall know it." The dog had a name that could not be spoken in the house. She did not ask why. She had learned that the questions one does not ask are the ones that get answered. The first event of the season at Ravensworth was a dinner for 30 on the 4th of November, and it existed for one purpose everybody understood and nobody said aloud. Mrs. Daltane, Selina Ware, intended to marry her nephew off before the year turned. She had assembled the field herself. Lady Cordelia was the front-runner, and knew it. Honora was to attend, not as a guest, as the thing that stood behind Mrs. Brand. Ware's chair, and fetched the fan and the shawl and the drops, and ate afterward, in the housekeeper's room if there was anything left. The dining room seated 30, along a table of Spanish mahogany, the candles in silver, 4 footmen at the walls, as handsome as anything in the north, and freezing, because the Marquess did not permit fires above a certain hour in rooms he was not sitting in, and nobody had thought to countermand it for the guests. Honora stood behind the chair in her gray stuff gown with her hands folded and watched 30 people perform. She watched Edmund Ware at the head of the table and noticed what nobody else appeared to notice, which was that he did not eat. He moved food, he turned the stem of his glass a quarter turn, and set it down and turned it back. He answered when addressed, short and correct, and the answers cost him something, and when the conversation left him, he went absolutely still, the way a man goes still who is very tired, and has learned that stillness is cheaper than motion. She had watched her father sit like that in the last winter. She looked away. Lady Cordelia was seated at his right hand, which was Mrs. Metchin. "Ware's doing?" And she had brought the subject of the dogs to the table because she had decided it was charming. "Your lordship must know," she said, "that they very nearly ate me on Tuesday. I was quite prepared to die on your gravel. Only your companion woman was there, and they went to her instead, and I own I was never so relieved to be passed over." She laughed. Several people laughed. It was not unkind. It was worse than unkind. It was the laugh people give a thing that has been correctly categorized. "Perhaps," said Mrs. Ware, from the middle of the table with her fan at the height she always held it, "the creatures know their own. She has the hands for it. A dog will always go to the servant who feeds it. Honora, standing behind that chair, felt the room decide something about her in the space of one sentence. The servant who feeds it. She did not move. She had learned what her face was for, and her face did nothing at all. Her hand closed on the back of Mrs. Knee. Ware's chair, and the wood was cold, and she felt her own pulse in her fingertips against it, quick and shaming and entirely her own business. At the head of the table, the Marquess set his glass down. Mrs. Planks. Blake does not feed my dogs, he said. The words were level. They were not loud. They landed in the middle of the table like a dropped fork. Mrs. Ware's fan hesitated, 1/2 inch, and recovered. Miss Blake, Honora said before she could stop herself. I have not been married. 30 people looked at her. She had spoken at a table where she was not a guest. She felt the heat go up her throat and into her face, and knew that everyone could see it. The Marquess looked at her for the length of 2 heartbeats. Miss Blake, he said. Then he turned to the man on his left and asked about the Selby drainage, and the table exhaled, and the moment closed over like water, and Honora stood behind the chair with her heart going like a bird in a box, understanding that she had just been corrected in her favor by the first man in the county, in front of 30 people, and that she had no idea what to do with it afterward. In the housekeeper's room, Mrs. Dunn put a plate in front of her without comment and said, to the fire, rather than to Honora. He has not corrected anybody at that table in 4 years. Honora ate her cold mutton and said nothing, because if she had opened her mouth she was not certain what would have come out of it. The next morning she rose at 6, as she always did, because Mrs. Creeby Ware did not want her before 9, and the hours before 9 were the only ones she owned. She went out into the physic garden in the dark, with her father's compass in her pocket, and the dogs came. They always came. That was the thing she had not told anybody. From the first morning they had come. Bran arrived first, out of the fog by the wall, and leaned his head against her hip. Ash put her nose into Honora's palm, and left it there. Vesper, who was old and whose hips hurt her in the cold, came last and lay down in the frost near Honora's feet, and sighed, like a man setting down a trunk. Honora stood in the dark with 3 dogs the county believed were savage, and scratched the hollow behind Bran's ear until his eyes closed. Somebody taught you, she said quietly. That is all this is. Somebody taught you this. And then they stopped. She did not know how right she was. She stood in the frost and said the true thing aloud to a dog, and there was nobody to hear it, except that there was. The library had a window on the physic garden, and the Marquess kept early hours, and he had been standing at that window with an unread letter in his hand for a quarter of an hour. The frost held for a week. 3 things happened in it, and Honora understood the significance of none of them at the time. The first was that a fire appeared in Mrs. Ware's morning room at 7 o'clock, an hour and a half before the rule permitted it, and Mrs. Price it. Dunn said only that his lordship had altered the order. The second was that Honora, crossing the stable yard, met the Marquess coming the other way with his coat unbuttoned and mud on his boots, and he stopped and looked at her shawl, gray and thin and darned twice at the elbow. That is not enough, he said. My lord, your shawl, in this weather it is not enough. She had not known what to answer. He had not waited for one. He had walked on toward the house, and she had stood in the yard with the wind coming off the moor, and understood that she had been criticized, and she had gone on with her errand, with her face burning. 3 days later, a folded wool mantle in plain dark green appeared on the chair in her room with no note, and Mrs. Dunn said only that things came out of the linen presses from time to time, and it was not her business to account for all of them. The third thing was the compass. She dropped it crossing the gravel court at dusk, and it skittered under the stone bench by the door, and she went down on her knees in her one good gown to get it. And when she came up with it, the Marquess was standing 4 feet away with a lamp. He looked at the thing in her hand for a long moment. "That is a physician's compass," he said. "The old pattern. There is a dent in the case." "There is. How do you come to have it?" She could have lied. Companions lied all day. The small, necessary lies that keep a position. She looked at the dent in the brass and found she did not have the lie in her. "It was my father's," she said. "He carried it 30 years. He was thrown from his gig at Harden Bridge in the winter of 1814, and the case took the stone instead of his hip. He was fond of saying so. He was a physician at Harden Cross. He died 2 years ago of a cough. He took off a man who could not pay him. And everything he owned was sold at Doncaster. But this," she stopped. It was more words than she had spoken aloud in 11 weeks, and she heard them land in the cold air and wished them back. The Marquess did not say he was sorry. He did not say anything of the kind. "Put it somewhere safer than a work-basket," he said, and turned and went in. She stood in the gravel court and was for a moment so angry she could not see. Then she went up and sat on the edge of the bed with the compass in her 2 hands, and found she could not make it mean what she had first heard. Put it somewhere safer. Not how tiresome, not what a small, sad thing. He had known it was a physician's compass. He had seen the dent from 4 feet away in lamplight. She had been furniture for 11 weeks. Furniture is not told to keep its things safe. The dinner of the 14th of November was Mrs. Nari, Ware's second attempt, and it was to be decisive, and she had invited the county's whole apparatus to witness it. Lady Cordelia came in white with pearls at her throat. Her mother came. Her brother, Gerald Manning, came, and it was Gerald who mattered, though nobody knew it yet. Honora spent that afternoon away from the house. Mrs. Ware had sent her to the village on foot, 2 miles each way, for a length of ribbon that had been the wrong shade of blue, and it was raining, and she walked it because there was no question of a carriage for such an errand. She came back at 4 along the field path and found the boy Jamie in the lane by the ice house, sitting in the mud with his arms around the old bitch Vesper, who was not moving. "She will not get up," he said. His face was wet, and it was not the rain. "I have been here an hour. She will not get up, and I cannot carry her, and if I go for my father, he will say she is done." Honora knelt in the mud in her only good stockings. Her hips had gone in the cold, and she had lain down where she stood, and she was too heavy for a boy of 7, and nearly too heavy for a woman of 26, who had walked 4 miles in the rain. Honora considered, for exactly 1 second, what an intelligent companion would do. An intelligent companion would go to the house, report the dog, and be back in time to dress Mrs. Barr. Where for the dinner at which her continued employment would be decided, she got her arms under the dog. Instead, it took her 40 minutes to get Vesper up the lane and into the straw of the empty loose box, in stages, sitting down in the mud twice, the boy pushing at the hindquarters and swearing in a manner learned from his father. Her gown tore at the shoulder seam. Her hands went raw where the wet rope halter ran through them. She got hay over the dog, sent the boy for warm water, and rubbed the old bitch's hips another half hour, until Vesper stopped shaking and put her muzzle on Honora's knee. "Do not tell anybody it was me," Honora said to the boy. "Tell them you found her and you fetched a groom. Say it exactly that way." "Why?" "Because if they know I was 2 hours in a stable in this gown, I shall be turned off by Friday." The boy thought about it and nodded, because 7-year-olds understand that kind of arithmetic better than most grown people do. Honora walked out of the loose box at 5:30, filthy to the elbow, her gown torn at the shoulder, her hair down her back, and at the far end of the stable range in the dark under the arch, the Marquess of Ravensworth was standing perfectly still with his hand on the doorframe. He had been there some time. She could not tell how long. He did not speak. He stepped back into the shadow of the arch to let her pass, and she passed him with her chin up and her ruined skirts in her fists, and she did not look at him, and he did not stop her. He stood in the arch for a long while after she had gone. She was 40 minutes late, dressing Mrs. Bray. Where, and was told in front of the maid, that she was slovenly, ungrateful, and very likely stupid, and she said, "Yes, ma'am," 3 times, and went down the back stairs to stand behind the chair. The dinner went as such dinners go. Mrs. Sex Ware worked her nephew like a woman driving a heavy horse, and Lady Cordelia sparkled, and the Marquess turned the stem of his glass a quarter turn, and set it down and turned it back, and did not eat. And then Gerald Manning, who had drunk a good deal of the claret, decided to be amusing about the dogs. "I say, Ravensworth, this business of the hounds, it will not do, you know." My sister could not get out of the carriage. "A grown woman held at bay on your own gravel. They want disciplining, or they want the gun." "They are disciplined," the Marquess said. "Then explain to me, if you please, why they went to a servant and would not suffer a lady." Silence went along the table the way a crack goes along ice. "Oh, we have had this," said Mrs. Ware comfortably, and her fan came up. "It is no mystery. A dog goes to the one who smells of the kitchen. My companion is a good, useful, humble creature, and the animals know their own. There is nothing in it but that, the servant who feeds it." She had heard it in a carriage in private, and now at a table of 30 in the mouth of the woman who paid her, and it was smoother the second time, and went in deeper. She kept her hands folded. She kept her face still. At the head of the table the Marquess put down his glass and did not pick it up again for the rest of the meal, and afterward, when the ladies had withdrawn, Prentice found him alone in the dining room, looking at nothing with his hand flat on the mahogany. The morning after the dinner, Honora was in the physic garden at 6 with the dogs in the fog when the library window opened. "Miss Blake," she had her hand in Brand's ruff. She took it out and stood the way one stands when addressed by a Marquess, which is straight and slightly away. "My lord, come in." Out of that, it was a command. She heard it as a command. She went in, because there was nothing else to do with a command from the man who owned the roof over her, and stood on the flagstones inside the library with her boots wet and her hands filthy, and the room going up around her in bookshelves to a ceiling 20 feet off. He had lit the fire himself. She could tell because the tongs were wrong. "Sit down," he said. She sat on the edge of a chair. He did not sit. He stood at the window with his back half to her, and looked out at the garden where the 3 dogs had arranged themselves on the frost to wait for her, and he was quiet so long she began to be afraid. "They were my wife's," he said. Honora went very still. Her name was Alice. She bred them herself out of her father's line and mine, and trained them to the door, and thought it very funny that they would not let the county past her. He said it without inflection, the way a man reads a list. She had a way of standing among them. She would put a hand down without looking, and one of them would put its head under it. She never had to look. That is the thing I remember. She never had to look. The fire moved. Honora did not. She died of a fever in the March of 1822. She was ill 9 days. On the 4th day the physician from Selby told me it was nothing above a chill, and that a second opinion would insult him, and I had been a Marquess 11 months, and had not yet learned that a man may insult a physician. He turned the ring on his little finger once. I could have had a man from York in a day and a half. I did not send because I was told not to worry, and because it was easier to be told that. She was dead on the 9th day. He had said it exactly once. He did not say it again. "The dogs went to the door of her room," he said, "and they stayed at it 4 days, and when they understood they went to the front door instead, and they have not let a lady past it since. The household says they are savage. The household is more comfortable with savage. It is a shorter word than the other one." Honora sat on the edge of the chair in her wet boots and understood, all at once, what she had walked into 11 weeks ago, and had been living inside without seeing. They were not guarding the house. "Brand was hers particularly," he said. "She named him. I have not been able to hear it said in 4 years, and the whole of my household has arranged itself around that fact, which is an absurd thing for a household to do, and I have permitted it, which is worse. Bran, Honora said. Ra? He did not move. In the garden, the great gray dog lifted his head at the window. Yes, said the Marquess of Ravensworth after a moment. That is his name. And then he said still to the window in the same level voice, Why did they go to you? I do not know, my lord. You do know. You said it in that garden 3 weeks ago. Somebody taught them. And then they stopped. He turned around then, and looked at her directly for the first time since she had come in. I was standing here. I heard you. Honora's face went hot. She thought of every morning of the last 3 weeks, every word she had said aloud to a dog, because there was nobody in that house she could say anything to. I am sorry, she said. It was not my place to say it. It was the only true thing anyone has said in this house in 4 years. He said it flatly, as a fact requiring no response. Do not apologize for it. The clock on the chimney-piece struck 7. Somewhere above them, the household began to move. You carried Vesper, he said. She had known it was coming since she had passed him under the arch. The boy fetched a groom, she said. The boy is 7, and he lies badly, and he told his father a story. With your hands all over it, he crossed to the fire and put a log on it, and did not look at her. You walked 4 miles in the rain, spent 2 hours in a stable, tore the only gown you own, and told the child to keep your name out of it. Why? Because I should have been turned off. Yes, he said. You would have been. Answer the question. Honora looked at her raw hands in her lap. The true answer was that she had been furniture for 11 weeks, and an old dog dying in a lane had needed something only she could give. And for 40 minutes in the mud, she had been a person again, and she would have paid a great deal more than a gown for those 40 minutes. Because she was cold, she said, and there was nobody else in the lane. The Marquess of Ravensworth stood at his own fire with his back to her, and said nothing at all for a long moment. Go and get your breakfast, Miss Blake, he said. Take the green mantle. It is yours. It was always yours. She stood in the corridor outside the library for a full minute afterward with her hand flat against the wall. The trouble came, as trouble in that county always came, through the post. Gerald had been drinking claret and thinking, which is a bad combination in a man with a sister to settle, and on the 20th of November he wrote to a magistrate in Selby about the deerhounds of Ravensworth. He used the word dangerous. He used the word vicious. He described a lady of quality held prisoner in her own carriage, in fear of her life, and suggested the animals be destroyed as a matter of public safety before someone was killed. The magistrate was an old man named Mr. Peters, who had known the 6th Marquess and did not want the business at all. He wrote back that he would come out on the 1st of December and see the animals himself, before witnesses, and form a view. Mrs. Ware was delighted and did not trouble to hide it, and Honora, standing behind her chair with the shawl over her arm, listened to her employer lay the whole strategy out to Lady Cordelia over the tea things as though there were nobody else in the room. Because there was nobody else in the room. Furniture cannot hear. He will not give up those creatures, Mrs. Ware said. He would sooner give up the house. So Mr. Det. Peters will order them destroyed, and Edmund will be forced to choose, and a man forced to choose learns that he cannot go on as he is. He must marry. A wife would have the animals gone within a month, and he knows it. She poured. It is unkind. I am aware that it is unkind. I have watched that boy sit alone at the head of that table for 4 years, and I would do a great deal unkinder than this to get him out of that chair. It was the only honest thing Honora ever heard her say. It did not make it better. It made it worse. The woman was not a monster. She was simply certain, and her certainty had a boot on it. Honora carried the shawl upstairs and stood in the cold little room at the end of the passage, and took out the compass and turned it over in her hands. She had £4.10 in the world. She had a position she would lose the moment she made a sound. She had a dented brass compass and a green mantle she had not paid for. And she had in her head a thing she had heard 11 days earlier, at a table where nobody had thought her worth noticing. Mr. Seb. Gerald on the claret holding forth about the hounds. Saying the words, "My sister could not get out of the carriage. Honora had been in that carriage." She had opened the far door and stepped down onto that gravel, and walked 2 strides in front of Lady Cordelia's face. And not one of those animals had touched her. Lady Cordelia had seen it. The dogs had never gone at anyone. They had stood, and they had shown their teeth, and they had not moved 1 inch off the flagstones. In 11 weeks, Honora had watched them do it 4 times, to 4 different ladies, and every single time they had stood on the stone, and never once crossed onto the gravel. They had not been bred to attack. They had been trained to hold a doorway. She could prove it, in front of a magistrate and 30 witnesses on the 1st of December, and the proof would cost her every single thing she had. If you have ever done the sum I am about to describe and come out the wrong side of it on purpose, you already know what she chose. She wrote a letter that night, 3 times before it was right, and she did not sign it because a companion's name is worth nothing on a page. She set it out plainly, dated and specific, describing 4 separate occasions with the ladies named, stating that on no occasion had any animal crossed the line of the flagstones, that this was not accident but discipline, and that she was prepared to say so before witnesses. She sealed it, and she walked it to the village herself at 6 the next morning and put it into the hand of the postboy addressed to Mr. Peters at Selby. Then she came back and made Mrs. Ware's chocolate. Mrs. Preet. Ware was not a stupid woman, and the postboy had been taking her letters for 4 years, and he was fond of her because she gave him 6pence at Christmas. And on the 29th of November he mentioned that the companion had walked all the way down herself with one for Selby, which was a queer thing for a companion to do. Mrs. Ware did not raise her voice. That was not her instrument. She waited until the 30th, and she waited until the drawing room was full, because a thing done privately can be denied, and a thing done in a drawing room cannot. Lady Cordelia was there and her mother, and Gerald with his boots to the fire. Prentice was at the door, 2 footmen at the sideboard, and Mrs. Dunn had come up about the linen and had not gone down again. "Honora," said Mrs. Press. "Ware pleasantly. Come here, if you please." Honora came and stood on the carpet. "You wrote to Mr. Peters at Selby." "I did, without my knowledge or my leave on a matter concerning this family, over my nephew's head." "In my house." "Yes, ma'am. May I ask what you imagined you were doing?" Honora looked at the fire irons rather than at anyone's face, because if she looked at a face she might not manage it. "Telling him what I saw," she said. Mrs. Ware laughed. It was a light, entirely social sound, and it did more damage than shouting could have done. "What you saw? Do you hear her, Miss Blake? Let us be exact, since you are fond of exactness. You are a paid companion at £30 a year. You have no family, no fortune, no connection. You are the woman who holds the basket. You are useful, you are humble, and you are nothing whatever to do with this. The magistrate did not want your opinion. The dogs go to you because you smell of the kitchen, and that is the whole of your claim upon this matter and upon this house, the servant who feeds it. The third, voicing. A drawing room in front of 9 people, with the boots to the fire. Honora stood on the carpet and felt it go all the way in. "You will leave in the morning," said Mrs. Ware. "You will not be given a character. I am sorry for it. I think you meant well, and I think you have been made foolish by a little kindness, and I have seen a great many young women ruined exactly this way." "Yes, ma'am," Honora said. She went up the back stairs. She did not cry, because there was no privacy in that house to cry in, and because the thing in her chest was not grief. She packed everything she owned into one box, and it did not fill it. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark with her father's compass in her 2 hands, and thought with a clarity that surprised her, that she had known the price before she walked to the village, and had walked to the village anyway, and that this was the best thing she had done since Doncaster. The green mantle was on the chair. She folded it and left it on the bed. It had never been hers, and she had known it at the time. At 6 the next morning, the 1st of December, she came down the back stairs with her box. The dogs were at the garden door. All three. Bran with his head against the wood, Ash on the flagstone, Vesper who could walk again, up on her feet in the cold with her weight off her bad side. Honora put down the box and knelt and put her arms around Bran's neck for the last time and did not make any sound at all. "You had better let me by," she said into his coat. "It is not your doorway to hold." He did not move. That was where the Marquess found her, at 10 minutes past 6, on her knees in the cold, with her box beside her and her arms around. His wife's dog and Mr. Peter's carriage already turning in at the gate an hour early, because old magistrates rise early and hate to be late. He did not ask her what had happened. He had a letter in his hand from Selby on his breakfast table 20 minutes earlier, enclosing a copy of an unsigned statement describing 4 occasions with the ladies named and the line of the flagstones not once crossed, and asking, with an old man's dry courtesy, whether his lordship happened to know who in his household possessed such an exact and observant eye. "Get up," he said. She got up. "Where is your mantle?" "On the bed, my lord." It was not mine. Something went through his face, and this time it did not go away. "Come with me," he said. "I am dismissed. I am aware. Come with me." The magistrate saw the dogs in the gravel court at 9:30, and there were witnesses because Mr. Peters had insisted on them, and Mrs. Ware had insisted on rather more than he asked for. The Mannings were there. Half the county was there. Mrs. Ware stood on the top step with her fan at exactly the correct height, and the whole thing arranged around her like a room she had furnished. The dogs stood at the door on the flagstones and did not move. Mr. Setchers, Peters, who was 71 and had no intention of walking up to a deerhound, sent a footman. The dogs showed him their teeth. He came back. Mr. Peters wrote something down. "Send a lady," said Gerald. "That is the whole of the complaint. Send my sister." Lady Cordelia went 8 steps up the gravel, in white kid boots, and Ash rose. And Ash showed her the whole length of her teeth, and made that low sound that was older than barking. And Lady Cordelia stopped dead, and Ash did not take one single step off the stone. "There," said Gerald. "There it is. Write that down." "I have written it," said Mr. Peters mildly. "The animal has not moved." It threatened her. It did. Mr. Peters looked at his paper. It did not approach her. Neither did the other two. "I am told this is invariable. I am told it in a document of some particularity which arrived at my house on Tuesday and which describes 4 such occasions and which was not signed." The gravel court went very quiet. "An anonymous letter," said Mrs. Ware from the top step, and her voice was still entirely pleasant. "From a discharged servant, I imagine. It can hardly weigh with you." "It weighs a good deal with me, ma'am, because everything in it is true, and I have just watched the whole of it happen." Mr. Peters folded the paper. "A dog that holds a threshold is a guard. A dog that crosses one is a danger. The distinction is the entire law on the matter, and it appears to be understood in this house by exactly one person. I should like very much to know which one." Nobody spoke. And then the Marquess of Ravensworth walked out of his own front door, past his dogs, down his own steps, across his own gravel, and stopped in front of a woman in a gray darned shawl, standing at the back of the crowd beside a box with everything she owned in it. The county turned to watch him do it. He put out his hand. Honora looked at it. She had been furniture for 12 weeks, and she did not understand a hand held out in front of 100 people, and her own hand came up before her mind permitted it, because her body had known the answer for 3 weeks and had been waiting to be asked. He took her hand and turned and brought her up the gravel to where the magistrate stood, and the crowd came apart in front of them, the way a crowd does. The dogs came off the flagstones. All 3 of them, down the steps and across the gravel, and Bran put his head against her hip and leaned there and shut his eyes, and Ash lay down across her feet, and old Vesper lowered herself into the gravel beside them with a sigh like a man setting down a trunk. For the first time in 4 years, the doorway of Ravensworth Hall stood open and unguarded. Mrs. Ware's fan came down. The Marquess of Ravensworth looked at the magistrate, and then he looked at the county, and he did not raise his voice because he never had. "Miss Blake wrote your letter. She is to be my wife." The silence afterward lasted a long time. Half the county had come to watch 3 dogs die, and had instead watched a Marquess cross his own gravel, and there was no card in anybody's hand for that. Lady Cordelia Manning looked at the woman in the darned shawl standing in a heap of deerhounds with the Marquess's hand still holding hers, and understood all at once that she had never been in the running at all, that there had been no running, and that the whole autumn had been a room she had walked round the outside of. Mrs. Ware came down 2 steps and stopped. Her mouth moved before her voice arrived. "Edmund, Edmund, you cannot. She is a companion." Her father was a country physician. "She has nothing. She has £30 a year. She is a companion, Edmund." Her father was a physician, the Marquess said, and if I had sent for a man like him in the March of 1822, my wife would be standing here. Mrs. Ware's hand went to the stone balustrade and stayed there. She was not destroyed. She was not ruined. She was simply, in the space of 1 sentence, moved out of the center of a room she had run for 4 years, and she stood on the steps of her nephew's house and looked at what she had been doing to him with all that certainty, and her face went white, and she said, very quietly, "Oh, and nothing else." Mr. Peters put his pencil away. "The animals are guards," he said, "and well kept, and I shall write it so. My lord, Miss Blake," he put on his hat, "somebody had better fetch this lady a chair. She has been standing in the cold a long while, I think." It was the first time in 12 weeks that anybody in that county had offered her a chair. They were married in the parish church on the 16th of January, by license, 9 people present, and no breakfast for 200. Mrs. Dunn came, Prentice came and cried, and denied it afterward with great firmness. The boy Jamie came in a coat that had belonged to his father and held the ring in a fist so tight it had to be pried out. Mrs. Ware came too. She was asked. That was Honora's doing, and it took 3 attempts to explain to her husband why. And the explanation she arrived at was that a woman who had sat in a cold house for 4 years, watching a boy she loved go to stone, had been wrong about the remedy and not wrong about the illness. Mrs. Ware sat in the second pew and wept steadily through the whole of it, and at the church door afterward she took Honora's 2 hands and looked at the palms, where the rope had run through them in the rain, and she did not say she was sorry because she was aware, and they did not. And she pressed those hands hard enough to hurt and let them go. Snow came in February, the deep kind that shuts the roads. The house was warm that winter for the first time in 4 years, because Honora had gone through it, room by room, with Mrs. Bray. Dunn and the fire rule had quietly ceased to exist, and nobody had ever countermanded it, and nobody ever mentioned that it was gone. On a night at the end of that month she sat on the floor by the library fire, which was not where a marchioness sat, and did not care, with the snow going sideways past the black window and Bran's head heavy across her lap, and Ash, asleep, against the fender and Vesper on the good side of the hearthstone where the warmth got into her hips. Her husband was at the desk behind her. He had been reading a letter about drainage for some time without turning it over. "Honora," he said. She had never got used to it. She did not think she ever would. She did not want to. She turned her head. He came and sat down on the floor beside her, a Marquess in his own library on the boards, like a boy, and he took her hand and turned it over, and looked at the palm, where there was a mark that was going to stay. He did not say anything about it. He had never once said the word sorry to her, and he never would. And she had stopped needing him to somewhere around the 2nd week of December. She took the small brass compass out of her pocket and put it in his hand, because it was the only thing she had ever owned that was worth giving, and she watched him find the dent with his thumb the way her father used to. Outside, the snow went on filling the gravel court. The doorway was open. Nothing was guarding it. The needle in the little brass case swung and settled and pointed north, the way it had for 30 years, Thank you for staying to the end of this one. If Honora's morning in the physic garden stayed with you, it is worth a moment in the comments.